Welcome everyone to the SurveyCTO webinar series. My name is Marta and I'm a customer research advisor at Dobility. I'll be moderating this webinar today. Just a piece of information, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in our video library in a few days. And today, we will be discussing the trends and responses to COVID-19 in the industry of tech. So, Tech 2020. To lead the discussion and to start this discussion, I am honored to present you and to introduce to you Lawrence Lee, the President and CEO at Dobility. And Chris Roberts, the founder and CTO at Dobility. So welcome.
Thanks, Marta.
Okay, awesome. So I invite you to start the discussion and then I will be back to open the discussion for some questions and answers, okay?
Thanks for that introduction, Marta. And thanks everyone for being here. We're very excited to share with you some thoughts we have about both the broader tech landscape and Dobility's thinking in the wake of the pandemic. So first and foremost, as we all know, COVID-19 is a global scale humanitarian crisis, and it's changed all of our lives dramatically and will certainly continue to have ramifications beyond the time of the disease that we're only now beginning to understand. One of the most obvious and dramatic areas of that impact is that the policy response to COVID-19 has included widespread measures, including lockdowns, social distancing requirements, and movement restrictions, the combination of which have essentially completely transformed work and life for much of the world's population. And these changes are apparent everywhere, but perhaps nowhere as much so as in the technology industry, which increasingly is a slice of how everyone lives and works. On the consumer side, one analysis suggested that in the first 8 weeks after coronavirus arrived in the US, e-commerce as a percentage of retail sales increased by 11%, more than the previous decade combined. The importance of communities in areas like fitness have given rise to virtual communities as we scramble to deal with isolation. And platforms like Peloton or the migration of existing communities like Berries onto Zoom have really tried to fill that gap, but also changed how we approach fitness and building and working out with a group of like-minded people. And more recently, even movies and movie theaters have come into question as Warner Media announced its 2021 slate would be released simultaneously to streaming and in theaters. On a more humorous note, Walmart noted that sales of shirts and tops increased, but sales of pants decreased, likely due to the prevalence of video conferencing. All of these really highlight that these minor and maybe not so minor changes in our day-to-day lives really translate to a complete rethinking of how we interact with each other, with technology platforms, and what we really need. From a business perspective, coronavirus has accelerated the shift towards remote work and more generally the digital transformation of companies. A survey of more than 2,500 enterprise-level decision makers conducted by Twilio showed that on average, COVID-19 had accelerated businesses' plans to implement new communication systems and channels by 6 years. The abrupt shift to remote work has also highlighted the benefits of cloud-based infrastructure, as companies that struggled with scaling VPNs and remote desktop logins have been pushed to move further and further towards cloud-based infrastructures. We've also seen well-established technologies really broaden their use cases, and in many cases, dramatically so. Zoom has gone from a B2B video conferencing solution, similar to a better version of WebEx, to a household name, where people are using it for everything from birthdays and social gatherings to K-12 education, and really demonstrated how some of the technologies that are built for a narrower use case in times like these suddenly explode in relevance. Government regulations limiting the use of electronic signatures have been relaxed during lockdowns because of the unfeasibility of having people go in person to establish identity. and created a new set of use cases for DocuSign and e-notary businesses. As we look at a post-pandemic world, one of the biggest challenges for ourselves as individuals and for any company that wants to stay relevant and create value for its users is understanding what the new normal is. Do remote communities shrink, or do they permanently replace some of their physical counterparts? In a lot of these cases, the answers will be in between, but understanding what determines that, what types of people, what types of communities will stay virtual is a huge question. How many people will never return to offices after the past year of serving as an ultimate proof of concept for remote work? The amount of time saved in commuting, the number of people who would have wanted to work remotely anyways, offset by the lack of in-person dialogue and interaction. Is even the consumer experience going to be completely changed? Will movie theaters and physical stores become an exception rather than the rule, now that we're all acclimated much more to living our lives online and getting what we need online? From the perspective of a technology company, these questions are both challenging to answer and extremely urgent. The tech platforms are already having to serve new use cases, sometimes ones that they weren't designed for, sometimes variations of what they were designed for. Going forward, companies will have to differentiate between temporary and permanent users, use cases, and feature needs. Platforms that saw changes in their markets and users will really need to strike a balance between serving the users they had in mind before coronavirus and the new opportunities that they see today. All of these decisions will be made in the absence of historical precedent and with data that by necessity is contextually much more limited, because everything we rely on to understand how our users work really assumes some level of equilibrium and ongoing behavior. And of course, over the past year, that's been the furthest thing from the truth. Given all of these questions and all of the change in how we are approaching work and life, we expect the coming years to be a really exciting time for the whole industry, as we all discover together, but maybe more importantly, have a chance to really help shape and enable what a post-pandemic world looks like, and hopefully find some silver lining in what has otherwise been a very tough time. And with that, I'll hand it off to Chris to discuss how Dobility in particular is thinking about this.
Thanks, Lawrence. So yeah, for our particular community of researchers and M&E professionals, obviously we've been affected by this past year and will be affected moving forward in some ways similar to the broader industry, but in some ways very particular. I think for us as a community, the pandemic sort of hit us in three pretty quick waves. First, we all saw international technical assistance, field visits, trainings, those sorts of things starting to slow down coming into the spring as the pandemic sort of started to take off, and we all became more aware of it. Then we started to see in-country travel and in-person data collection starting to slow down. And then suddenly there was this sort of, series of lockdowns that rippled through the world, put really a sudden halt to not only just in-person data collection, but even the simple acts like getting together for training or discussion, or even simpler activities like just handing off mobile devices. So centralized control and management of mobile devices all of a sudden became very, very difficult, which I think most of us couldn't really envision happening before. Since then, it's been kind of a long, slow road to get back to in-person activities. We're happy to see in a number of settings, people have been able to safely go back to in-person data collection activities. But even all the while, there's been this absolutely critical need for data to inform every manner of policy and program, to understand, like Lawrence said, we're operating tremendously outside of equilibrium here. And so, we don't really necessarily know what's going on by looking back. We have to look at data that's very, very current. And for that to happen, people need to be able to collect data. So, from the SurveyCTO side, our response has taken a few different forms. First, we kind of had to change the way we do business. So we couldn't plan and implement and roll out big product releases the way we used to. We had to adopt the same kind of rapid collaborative model of innovation and adaptation that we all saw springing up organically all across the community. So this is people, rather than releasing, published documents, sharing Google Docs and having those docs changing by the minute, hour, day, week, and with a lot of community input. We were all sort of knocked out of our comfort zones, and we had to find ways to adapt to keep our work going and keep data flowing. For us, we also had to accept that a large number of users would need to close or suspend their accounts in order to conserve grant funding. And not only that we'd have to extend free services to many of them in order to allow them to contribute to pandemic-related work. So as a business, this was sort of one of these, sort of existential challenges that I think every small business, sort of the world over, for the most part, has gone through this past year. We also had to immediately change our thinking about what we should be working on all across the company. So like Lawrence mentioned, this question of are we serving the needs that people used to have, or that we think they have, or that they, new needs that are emerging all the time, and how do we sort of weigh all of those things? I think we were really lucky in that we've been just working on a new way to make the SurveyCTO platform more flexible and adaptable to different settings. And so the first thing we did is just rush out the door our new field plugin capabilities and use those capabilities immediately with a set of example plugins to show how you could integrate telephone and SMS capabilities into survey workflows, since that seemed to be very quickly emerging as one of the most immediate adaptations, is a shift from in-person to telephone or SMS based communication. From there, we had kind of an all hands on deck approach to meeting users' evolving needs to try to keep everybody able to safely and responsibly keep collecting data. And in many cases, it was interesting to note, when the lockdowns hit, there was sort of an immediate, really troubling fall off in how many submissions we could see coming in, how much data people were collecting. The volume of data collection dropped off in a really alarming way in the initial weeks of those lockdowns. But interestingly, pretty quickly, we saw that the overall number of submissions and volume of data collection ramp back up, in many cases far in excess of where it had been before the pandemic. So there was this sort of, while many sorts of activity were essentially pausing, being suspended indefinitely, others were ramping up quite quickly. So our product team focused on rapidly improving how we integrate with telephone capabilities on data collection devices to make SurveyCTO better and better for conducting telephone surveys. So like Lauren said, the kind of like new use case, like Zoom all of a sudden being used for K through 12 education. SurveyCTO had always been used for telephone surveys, but it was sort of a niche use case. It wasn't something that the platform was at all optimized for. It wasn't a natural, it wasn't at all optimized for that. So all of a sudden that became a primary use case. We also focused on helping projects remotely onboard new enumerators and enumerator devices, which suddenly became much more critical. And then also how to remotely secure those enumerator devices so that local data would be safer and privacy would be better protected. It really was, though, it wasn't at all just our product team responding. So for example, our success team started much more intensively collaborating with a range of users to figure out how to adapt the platform's kind of core data set and case management capabilities to the challenging new workflows that were required for successful telephone surveying. They packaged these workflows into a growing body of well-documented examples for new users to adopt, pumped out webinars, and just other resources. They actually built, refined, and released a whole series of new field plugins to help improve these workflows and increase both data quality and data security. And meanwhile, at the same time, they worked tirelessly to assist countless projects scrambling to adapt to their own rapidly evolving challenges and needs during a time that was frankly pretty stressful for everyone. So the success team really kicked into gear this past year. And then our growth team, our sort of sales and marketing and communications part of the company, really kicked into gear to champion revisions to our subscription limits, managing regular communication and a sort of ramped up volume of communication both with and to the community, including organizing this webinar series. And then working to organize all the work we were doing under this new initiative, the Safe People and Data Initiative, to try to help everybody make sense of this constant volume of new changes, new resources, capabilities, evolving methods. So every team in the company really found all sorts of ways to contribute. At the same time, we also wanted to look to the future and consider what a post-pandemic world might look like and when it might arrive. So we had to ask ourselves, how can we help users not only weather this initial storm, but also adapt to this changed world, this longer term, like Lauren said, what the new normal is. As a company, we don't believe that the new normal, whenever it arrives, will look like the old normal. And so, essentially our old product roadmaps, our old thinking about where the platform was going and what user needs were, those, there are elements of those I'll talk about in a second that have remained stable, but there are many elements that we don't believe are at all stable and we think are sort of changed forever. We think that more in particular will be done remotely than before. So just like with, people going into offices and watching movies in theaters and all the rest, we believe that moving forward, more data collection work will be multimodal than it was before. And we think this is true because the technology and the methods teams are comfortable employing will simply have changed. The status quo will have changed, and there will be these enduring advantages to remote and multimodal work. So, for example, almost a decade ago, I was involved in research in India where we'd visit agricultural households to establish relationships and even give them mobile phones if they needed them. And then we'd conduct weekly follow-up phone surveys during an agricultural season. And then we'd follow up again at the end of the season to collect soil samples and sort of close out the relationship, maybe give a gift to the households. This was a method of data collection that had become more and more popular in settings like agriculture where a repeated observation was necessary. But we think that this kind of partly in-person, partly remote data collection work will become much more common. We also think that some methods of remotely onboarding enumerators and remotely collecting data will just turn out to be more efficient long-term once the necessary technology and infrastructure is in place. And by the way, once we have sufficient research on mode effects, representativeness, and other concerns so that we can employ these alternative methods of data collection with increasing confidence about the data quality and how to interpret that data, which many of you in the SurveyCTO community have been working hard on. So our product roadmap moving into 2021, starts with a commitment to continuing our work to facilitate both pandemic and post-pandemic data collection. This falls into a couple of categories I'll just touch on, and we can talk more about them in the Q&A if people are interested. One area we're working on at the moment is web forms. We've seen use of web forms increase dramatically, particularly on mobile devices. So we've already released improvements where we've been able to localize the interface into new languages for direct respondents and a greater degree of sort of enumerator understanding. We have a range of major improvements to the interface for mobile web forms. That'll be coming very soon. We're well underway with that, and then we'll be moving on to desktop browser improvements as well as a range of new options for those deploying web surveys in order to better control the overall user experience, like what options are available. CADI, or telephone surveying, we rushed out a series of new telephone survey capabilities at sort of a breakneck pace in 2020, and we know there'll be just a wide range of ways that we can improve upon those capabilities, and so we'll be working on that. In 2020, we did a lot to, when it comes to remote onboarding and training, we did a lot to try to streamline the process for remote onboarding, but not nearly as much, or maybe anything, to help with remote training of enumerators. And so this is an area we hope to contribute much more moving forward. And the same, I would say, about remote recruitment. We have some ideas about how to help new projects remotely recruit enumerators, but it's going to take more time and consultation with many of you in the SurveyCTO user base before we're certain that we have a good approach to that. So but before we move on to the discussion, I just want to point out that, you know, we have long-standing commitments here at Dobility relating to data security and data quality, and those haven't gone away. In terms of data security, in 2020, we had a lot of focus on mobile device security, and that work will continue. There was a lot of work that may have been mostly invisible relating to server and hosting security. And, you know, we hope that that work has essentially been invisible to all of you, but it's really important to point out just how challenging the world has become when it comes to keeping data and systems safe in kind of an increasingly perilous cyber world. So we have an email that I think just went out to many users today to talk about some of the security work that's gone on behind the scenes. So I won't get into the details unless somebody wants to talk about it later. But I wanted to mention also on the data quality front that in 2020, we had a lot of focus on sort of, if you imagine like the top of the funnel for data quality, we focused a lot on the enumerator experience, including whether you know, people are conducting interviews by telephone or in person, and the form design options available for projects to optimize the data collection process. And field plugins became a really central part of that story. So for example, the new EGRA capabilities to optimize sort of educational assessments using SurveyCTO, field plugins are allowing us to really refine the data collection instrument itself in a way that should really improve data quality. Moving forward, there are a range of ways that we hope to further improve data quality, having to do with statistics-powered quality control, the sensor metadata and capabilities that we've released the last few years, and then continuing to look at the potential for machine learning. So finally, I'll just say that we also know that every project includes a pretty healthy mix of field work, sample, and survey management challenges, and those have become quite acute with complex telephone surveys. And so we're continuing to evaluate the best ways that we can help to ease those challenges within the survey platform itself. So 2020 was a super challenging year for so many reasons, but I think we found really great ways to collaborate and overcome challenges in the space. And I'm really excited about what we can do in 2021. So I'll just hand off now to Marta for the discussion.